I am back, having gotten off my, not necessarily lazy, but somewhat unfocused arse, to continue bringing you my sparkling take on the Federalist. If you recall from my last video, or even high school, the Federalist is a series of letters published in New York newspapers in the late 1780s, written by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. The purpose of these letters, of these publications, was to convince the U.S. voter to ratify the then new U.S. Constitution. Why did we need a new U.S. Constitution? Why? To transform the country, of course. The country at that time was kind of a hot mess of debt, infighting, and was getting ready to be eaten out of the bag by the superpowers of the time. So, let's get on with it. Federalist number 2, concerning dangers from foreign force and influence, published October 31st, 1787. When the people of America reflect that they are now called upon to decide a question which, in its consequences, must prove one of the most important that ever engaged their attention, the propriety of their taking a very comprehensive as well as a very serious view of it will be evident. Nothing is more certain than the indispensable necessity of government. No, it can't be. A Tea Partier like me quoting the Federalist in support of the necessities of government. It can't be. Actually, now would be a good time to compare the similarities between Tea Partiers and the Founding Fathers. We both support a good, strong central government, an energetic government, as they called it. What we oppose are the excesses of government, whether it was the Stamp Act back in the day, or closer to our time, if it's the Fast and Furious, or Benghazi, or IRS, or just crazy bureaucrats getting in your face. That's what we oppose, not necessarily government. Nothing is more certain than the indispensable necessity of government, and it is equally undeniable that whenever and however it is instituted, the people must cede to it some of their natural rights in order to vest it with requisite powers. It is well worthy of consideration, therefore, whether it would conduce more to the interest of the people of America that they should, to all general purposes, be one nation under one federal government, or that they should divide themselves into separate confederacies, and give to the head of each the same kind of powers which they are advised to place in one national government. Okay, so what Publius is talking about here is unity. That is the big thing. Are we going to stay together, or are we going to go our separate ways? But before I talk about that, I want to talk about this natural rights thing, because it was really important to early Americans, but kind of a newish concept. John Locke, the Englishman, is your go-to guy for natural rights. Yeah, kind of an ugly dude. But before his time, during his time, and actually kind of still after his time, there was no such thing as rights. There was no such thing as natural rights. You got your rights from your ruler, your king, or your prince, or your khan, or your sultan. If he was a good guy, hey, that was great. And if he wasn't so much of a good guy, well, that kind of stunk for you. The key thing is that he told you if you were going to do well or not. So Locke comes along, and you have to do some research on him to understand that he was doing this research and this thinking in the midst of some pretty nasty Catholic versus Protestant violence in England at the time. And he comes along and he says, no, your rights don't come from the king. Your rights came from something bigger than the king, God, whatever gave you life. For you agnostics and atheists out there, you get the perquisites of natural rights just by being alive. Cool. It has until lately been a received and uncontradicted opinion that the prosperity of the people of America depended on their continuing firmly united, and the wishes, prayers, and efforts of our best and wisest citizens have been constantly directed to that object.
But politicians now appear who insist that this opinion is erroneous, and that instead of looking for safety and happiness in union, we ought to seek it in a division of the states into distinct confederacies or sovereignties. However extraordinary this new doctrine may appear, it nevertheless has its advocates, and certain characters who were much opposed to it formerly are at present of the number. Whatever may be the arguments or inducements which have wrought this change in the sentiments and declarations of these gentlemen, it certainly would not be wise in the people at large to adopt these new political tenets without being fully convinced that they are founded in truth and sound policy.
As alluded to in Federalist 1, after the Treaty of Paris had been signed, and you had peace, and America had won the Revolutionary War, everybody was pretty giddy, and everybody was pretty up on this whole union thing. Hey, we won the war by sticking together, and by golly, we're going to stay together. And as things started to sour, people started to change their mind. And it probably bugged the snot out of Alexander Hamilton, because his feeling was that you guys are being two-faced. You don't have the guts to come out and say what you really feel, because it was extremely popular, the idea of union. John Jay is being a little bit more tactful. He's saying, hey, you guys were for the union until you were against it. Both guys, Hamilton and Jay, are just, this is the downside of spiralizing, are just kind of putting it out on the table. Previously, everybody had been for the union, and they're just saying that now, okay, we acknowledge that there's a lot of feeling out there that we need to go our separate ways and we need to split up. And as Publius, as the writer of the Federalist and a supporter of the new U.S. Constitution, they're going to say, no, we stand for union. We are totally against splitting us up. I love my spiralizer.
It has often given me pleasure to observe that independent America was not composed of detached and distant territories, but that one connected, fertile, wide-spreading country was the portion of our Western Sons of Liberty. Providence has in a particular manner blessed it with a variety of soils and productions and watered it with innumerable streams for the delight and accommodation of its inhabitants. A succession of navigable waters forms a kind of chain around its borders as if to bind it together, while the most noble rivers in the world, running at convenient distances, present them with highways for the easy communication of friendly aids and the mutual transportation and exchange of the various commodities. With equal pleasure, I have as often taken notice that Providence has been pleased to give this one connected country to one united people, a people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government, very similar in their manners and customs, and who, by their joint counsels, arms, and efforts, fighting side by side throughout a long and bloody war, have nobly established general liberty and independence. This country and this people seem to have been made for each other, and it appears as if it was the design of Providence that an inheritance so proper and convenient for a band of brethren, united to each other by the strongest ties, should never be split into a number of unsocial, jealous, and alien sovereignties.
All right, I really appreciate here what Publius is saying, especially when he talks about the water. He's talking about all these wonderful rivers and how they're great aids to communication and community, all that sort of thing. And they were, especially at that time. Not only was water important for agriculture, but that was how you communicated. In the olden days, that's how you got your goods to market, because you didn't have a freeway or an interstate or a lot of roads. And but also that's it was your iPhone, your social media. That's how you communicated with people from other parts of the country. Now, the second paragraph, Publius starts to talk about how, hey, isn't it great that we're all from the same English Protestant background? And, okay, I can understand that may seem a bit dated right now, but I do give him a little bit of credit. At this point in time, everybody from that English Protestant background was getting ready to kick out of the boat everybody else from an English Protestant background. So, I understand the risk involved. I think in America we've kind of changed attitudes about that. We want more people in the boat. We want more diverse backgrounds because we think that gives us the best ultimate result. And in America, what is so unique and dare I say exceptional about us is that we are not a language or a religion or a race.
We are a nation based on a set of ideals, a set of how to govern ourselves, and we kind of speak the same language when it comes to that. Similar sentiments have hitherto prevailed among all orders and denominations of men among us. To all general purposes, we have uniformly been one people, each individual citizen everywhere enjoying the same national rights, privileges, and protection. As a nation, we have made peace and war. As a nation, we have vanquished our common enemies. As a nation, we have formed alliances and made treaties and entered into various compacts and conventions with foreign states. A strong sense of the value and blessings of union induced the people at a very early period to institute a federal government to preserve and perpetuate it. They formed it almost as soon as they had a political existence, nay, at a time when their habitations were in flames, when many of their citizens were bleeding, and when the progress of hostility and desolation left little room for those calm and mature inquiries and reflections which must ever precede the formation of a wise and well-balanced government for a free people. It is not to be wondered at that a government instituted in times so inauspicious should on experiment be found greatly deficient and inadequate to the purpose it was intended to answer.
I really like this language that Publius uses. One people, each individual citizen everywhere enjoying the same national rights, privileges, and protection. Now, of course, everybody, including me, is going to see that language as a little bit glaring today in light of the country's history, where we know perfectly well that not every citizen had equal rights, privileges, and protection. But it's pretty amazing to see how inspiring those words were in light of the country's additional history, the Civil War, for example, where 600,000 Americans lost their lives fighting over those words, and over 100 years of civil rights struggles to get each citizen everywhere the same national privileges, rights, and protection. But anyway, I don't think that's Publius's main point in this passage. I think his main point is just talking about, okay, we had this government, we declared independence, we fought this war, rah, rah, rah. We did it under great stress. And at a time of tremendous risk, we had a lot of stuff going on. It's no wonder there were a few flaws.
This intelligent people perceived and regretted these defects. Still continuing no less attached to union than enamored of liberty, they observed the danger which immediately threatened the former and more remotely the latter. And being persuaded that ample security for both could only be found in a national government more wisely framed, they as with one voice convened the late convention at Philadelphia to take that important subject under consideration. This convention, composed of men who possessed the confidence of the people, and many of whom had become highly distinguished by their patriotism, virtue, and wisdom in times which tried the minds and hearts of men, undertook the arduous task. In the mild season of peace, with minds unoccupied by other subjects, they passed many months in cool, uninterrupted, and daily consultation. And finally, without having been awed by power or influenced by any passions except love for their country, they presented and recommended to the people the plan produced by their joint and very unanimous councils.
Okay, so everybody knew that there were flaws with the Articles of Confederation. Some pretty big ones that could jeopardize either our liberty or security or both. And Americans have always been pretty good at balancing those core concepts. We've always known that they're related and that too much of one can affect the other. So, in February of 1787, Congress calls a constitutional convention. And in the summer of that same year, 1787, 12 of the 13 states send delegates. And they just sit there and they hammer out a new governmental structure. I don't know how cool the consultations were, because that was one of the most oppressively hot and humid summers that Philadelphia had experienced. Even the Southerners were complaining. And of course, they had no air conditioning and no iced coffee.
Admit, for so is the fact, that this plan is only recommended, not imposed. Yet let it be remembered that it is neither recommended to blind approbation nor to blind reprobation, but to that sedate and candid consideration which the magnitude and importance of the subject demand, and which it certainly ought to receive. But this, as was remarked in the foregoing number of this paper, is more to be wished than expected that it may be so considered and examined. Experience on a former occasion teaches us not to be too sanguine in such hopes. It is not yet forgotten that well-grounded apprehensions of imminent danger induced the people of America to form the memorable Congress of 1774. That body recommended certain measures to their constituents, and the event proved their wisdom. Yet it is fresh in our memories how soon the press began to teem with pamphlets and weekly papers against those very measures.
Publius is just saying here, don't give it just a thumbs up or thumbs down. Don't give the Constitution just a knee-jerk reaction. Read it, think about it, and vote based on what you think is best for the interests of the country. But like in Federalist 1, he knows that ain't going to happen. He talks about the experience that we had with the Congress of 1774. Now that Congress of 1774 really took the first American act. They formed a compact to boycott British goods, because the British were being kind of duty heads after the Boston Tea Party. And the Congress of 1774 was full of some pretty big guys in terms of founding father stuff. I mean, you had your George Washington, you had your Patrick Henry, your John Adams, your Sam Adams, the patriot, not the beer, your Christopher Gadsden. And in retrospect, of course, we see this as you know, a very good accomplishment. That Congress went on to call for another Congress, and it was that Congress that actually really got the ball rolling towards this whole independence thing. But what Publius is reminding us of is that even though the accomplishments of the Congress of 1774 were pretty amazing, at the time, the press was full of articles and opinions complaining about what a bad idea this whole independence thing was. I'm shocked.
Not only many of the officers of government who obeyed the dictates of personal interest, but others from a mistaken estimate of consequences or the undue influence of former attachments, or whose ambition aimed at objects which did not correspond with the public good, were indefatigable in their efforts to persuade the people to reject the advice of that patriotic Congress. Many, indeed, were deceived and deluded, but the great majority of the people reasoned and decided judiciously, and happy they are in reflecting that they did so. They considered that the Congress was composed of many wise and experienced men, that, being convened from different parts of the country, they brought with them and communicated to each other a variety of useful information, that, in the course of the time they passed together in inquiring into and discussing the true interests of their country, they must have acquired very accurate knowledge on that head, that they were individually interested in the public liberty and prosperity, and therefore that it was not less their inclination than their duty to recommend only such measures as, after the most mature deliberation, they really thought prudent and advisable. No disrespect to the Continental Congress, but after reading the words, Congress was composed of many wise and experienced men, and that each individually was interested only in the public liberty and prosperity, it seems a little strange, because I wouldn't say that about today's Congress. I wouldn't say that about most Congresses, but of course not every Congress can have the level of people that first Congress had, like your Washingtons and your Randolphs and your Adams and etc. We've had a lot of not-so-hot dudes in Congress, and actually the country has done quite well, actually even prospered. I think what's missing today is an attentive populace and an independent press. But, I don't know, we now have the internet, so maybe things will balance themselves out. Let's hope, and let's move on. These and similar considerations then induced the people to rely greatly on the judgment and integrity of the Congress, and they took their advice, notwithstanding the various arts and endeavors used to deter them from it. But if the people at large had reason to confide in the men of that Congress, few of whom had been fully tried or generally known, still greater reason have they now to respect the judgment and advice of the convention, for it is well known that some of the most distinguished members of that Congress, who have been since tried and justly approved for patriotism and abilities, and who have grown old in acquiring political information, were also members of this convention, and carried into it their accumulated knowledge and experience.
Okay, so there was a lot of hyperventilating in the run-up to the war, the Revolutionary War. And I think the point here is that, okay, that may be the case, but the American public eventually did support the acts of the Congress of 1774. They supported the boycott of British goods. They supported eventually the Declaration of Independence and the war with England, the country that most of them had ties to. I think Publius's point here is that look, you didn't really know the guys from the Congress of 1774, but you went along with what they decided because you thought about it and you looked at their backgrounds and, okay, we're going to do this. The guys from 1787, although there's not a tremendous amount of overlap, there is some overlap, and both of them were full of really smart guys. Publius is saying that this whole process has been kind of character tested. And if you went with the guys in 1774, you should go with the guys in 1787. It is worthy of remark that not only the first, but every succeeding Congress, as well as the late Convention, have invariably joined with the people in thinking that the prosperity of America depended on its union. To preserve and perpetuate it was the great object of the people in forming that Convention, and it is also the great object of the plan which the Convention has advised them to adopt. With that propriety, therefore, or for what good purposes are attempts at this particular period made by some men to depreciate the importance of the Union? Or why is it suggested that 3 or 4 confederacies would be better than one? I am persuaded in my own mind that the people have always thought right on this subject, and that their universal and uniform attachment to the cause of the Union rests on great and weighty reasons, which I shall endeavor to develop and explain in some ensuing papers. They who promote the idea of substituting a number of distinct confederacies in the room of the plan of the Convention seem clearly to foresee that the rejection of it would put the continuance of the Union in the utmost jeopardy. That certainly would be the case, and I sincerely wish that it may be as clearly foreseen by every good citizen, that whenever the dissolution of the Union arrives, America will have reason to exclaim, in the words of the poet, "Farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness." Publius. Okay, so John Jay, Publius, is saying the same thing he's been saying for a while, which is that the Union, aka the United States of America, is flawed. But the Union is better than separating and going our own different ways. So that's it for Federalist 2. Thanks very much for watching. Next up is Federalist 3, concerning the same subject. Dangers from foreign force and influence. Yeah, Jay was really into this. So see you then.